Hello, and welcome to Old Ways in New Jersey here on East Brunswick Television. I'm Angus Kress Gillespie, your host. I'm here today with author Michael Aaron Rockland, whose latest book is Navy Crazy. The book is a memoir of Rockland's time in military service as a young medic working in a locked psychiatric ward with Navy and Marine mental patients in Japan. It was peacetime. With no one to shoot, people in the military began shooting themselves and each other. During his time in the ward, Rockland came close to being murdered twice. It's my pleasure to welcome Michael Rockland to our studio today. So, Michael, I understand that this book is a memoir, and if I'm not wrong, you've written novels and you've written nonfiction, but this is a memoir. So how is a memoir different, and what are the challenges in writing a memoir?
It's a good question, and I think what I have to say has to do with other memoir writers, and especially with this one, because I'm talking about the world of the U.S. Navy between my ages of 20 and 22. And so here I am writing about the world I inhabited 50 years ago. And somebody could legitimately ask, how do you remember all this stuff? And I'd answer it that a memoir is really a subjective form because it's what I choose to remember clearly. I don't want to lie about it and say I'm absolutely certain that absolutely everything in this book must have taken place, because anybody else who had been there at the same time I was there, that is in the Navy and in Yokosuka, Japan, would probably remember it differently. We'd write a totally different book. So I think readers should always read a memoir with that caveat that it's a subjective form. It's kind of, I'd say, it's not fiction, but it probably has fictional elements because anybody's going to remember things as they remember them.
Did it take a lot of discipline to sit down and write this?
Well, I'd been telling these stories forever.
Orally, to friends?
To friends.
In the course of conversation?
Exactly. And
perhaps you, consciously, unconsciously, had already shaped the stories in the telling and retelling.
Yeah, it's interesting because my previous book was also a memoir, and right now I'm writing a novel, so I really know the difference.
Yeah.
I very viscerally know the difference,
of course,
between the two. In a novel, you can, as long as it's called a novel, you can make up anything. Yeah. And by the way, you know what's a nice difference between novels and memoirs or anything else is that in a novel, you have to tone it down. Some of the stories I tell in this book are pretty wild and hairy things, and scary, and maybe I would add improbable. How could that have happened? Well, what I've discovered, and I'm not the first, is that life really is more interesting than fiction. That in fiction, when I write a novel, I have to tone it down
to make it plausible, to make it believable.
To make it plausible, yeah, because people say, "Well, that's ridiculous," and you know the expression "jumping the shark," which came from an incident in Happy Days years ago, where the Fonz jumped over a shark on water skis, and it kind of wrecked the show after that. a novel, there's always a danger of jumping the shark. People reading it, that's ridiculous. That could never have happened. With a memoir, all these things did happen. Life is stranger than fiction. For example, coincidences. They happen all the time in our lives. You put them in a novel, people say, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, getting to the specific book at hand, Navy Crazy, it's about your experience as a hospital corpsman in a locked psychiatric ward in Yokosuka, Japan. And you said that you were drafted, but that leads to the question, how come you were drafted into the Navy? Most people get drafted into the Army.
Yeah, I was drafted into the Army, and when I was at the induction center on Whitehall Street in Manhattan, the same building that Arlo Guthrie makes fun of in Alice's Restaurant, both the movie and the song, okay? When I was inducted there, and by the way, that building was then blown up in the late 60s by the weathermen. But I went there with the piece of paper. It said, greetings, you're in the Army, show up on such and such a date. And suddenly this sergeant came in and started cursing at the 100 of us who were there. And I heard more profanity in 5 minutes than I think I'd ever heard in my life put together. And he said, well, you know, some of you people, I'll use a nicer word than he used, are absolutely useless. So the Navy this month doesn't have enough enlistees. And so he said, you have 30 seconds to make up your mind. Anybody who wants to be in the Navy instead of the Army, step forward. I thought, wow, the Navy, that sounds great. Ships and seeing the ocean and seeing the world and not have to dig foxholes. It just seems so much more clean and adventurous. So I stepped forward, and very luckily, I was the 29th of the 30 that were picked to go into the Navy.
So then what was boot camp like?
As far as I'm concerned, I learned one thing in boot camp. It's possible it's gotten better. I don't know. It was simply 8 weeks of humiliation. It seemed to me absolutely ridiculous. And I say so in the book. And then at the end of it,
nobody ever said, thank you for serving your country.
Yeah, well, that was another thing. At the induction ceremony, I'm sorry, it wasn't the ceremony at the induction at Whitehall Street. Nobody played the Star Spangled Banner. Nobody said, welcome on behalf of President Eisenhower, the American people, thank you for your service. Nobody ever said it then. And nobody ever said it during, and nobody ever said it after. I'm not complaining because I got great stories out of it and wrote this book. But yeah, it's possible that now we have an all-volunteer military, which, by the way, I totally disapprove of. It's why we get into wars like Iraq, because you can send these people anywhere, whereas if it was a draft, as it was during Vietnam, there would have been even wider spread opposition to the Iraq war. So suddenly I found myself in the Navy. When boot camp was over, everybody got their orders, and mine were to go to hospital corpsman school, 16 weeks.
Do you have any inkling why you were chosen for hospital corpsman school?
I think part of it is since I was drafted. By the way, I was a college graduate and I was drafted. The Navy already hated me for both of those reasons. In fact, when I first came in, they said, well, you're a college grad, why don't we send you to officers candidate school? And I said, that's okay, I'll do my service. I don't want to be an officer, and it would have meant more years in the Navy. And I was doing the Navy between undergraduate days and graduate school, and I'd already been accepted in grad school, and so I was going to do my 2 years and then go to grad school. So,
did you ever have any regrets about not accepting the officer candidate school?
I did during boot camp, certainly, because I couldn't imagine that whatever training officers get would have been so humiliating.
Yeah.
And by the way, when we were told anybody wants to volunteer for the Navy, preceded by much profanity, you know, I thought when I was in boot camp, I thought, this is just absolutely awful. Why didn't I just stay in, you know, why didn't I go to officers candidate school? I mean, you see, you could have come out of ROTC and you would have been an officer automatically. As a college grad, they were going to send me to officers candidate school. And there were times when of not only humiliation, but of brutality. I mean, I was beaten up. You know, I don't know if they do that in the service these days, but I mean, literally, physically beaten was part of the humiliation of the whole thing. And another crazy thing, though I was trained to be a medic, which means, you know, how do you take care of people who have a battlefield wound? How do you staunch the bleeding? How do you get them to a surgeon as quickly as possible? How much morphine do you give them? What are the signs of shock and all of that sort of thing? How do you keep somebody alive so they can be till they can be on the surgeon's table? None of that training did I ever use because when I got sent to Japan, I was sent to work in psychiatric, and we had two wards, an open ward and a lock ward, and I was assigned to this high security lock ward.
We're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. How were you selected for Japan? How did that come about?
Well, good question. As kind of a carrot, they held out for us in medic school. We were called medics for short. They said whoever gets the highest grades in a class will get to go to Japan. Everybody else will be sent to Camp Pendleton, California, to go with the Marines, because the Marines do not have their own medical service. They're a separate service, but the Navy takes care of their medicine. And so I thought, wow. And I worked harder, I think, than I ever did in college or grad school. I wanted to get the highest grades among the 52 of us who were in this class. And sure enough, I did. And I get to go to Japan. And then I got my orders, Camp Pendleton, California. I said, these lying thieves, what is the matter with them? Is this a mistake, or were they lying? So I went to see the base warrant personnel officer. I said, sir, I was supposed to go to Japan. And he said, just because you're a college boy. I said, no, please, sir, that has nothing to do with it. I was told if I got the highest grades, I'd go to Japan. And so he said, well, I don't believe that, but he made some phone calls and discovered this was true, and tore up my old orders and gave me orders to Japan. So that was kind of wonderful to go to Japan.
Very lucky. What was the trip like on the way to Japan?
Oh, perilous, let's say. It was a three-leg, this is all propeller planes, and they didn't have that much of a range. There were 3 hops to Hawaii, and then from Hawaii to Wake Island, and then from Wake Island to Japan. And the first 2 nearly crashed. They were pretty awful. The plane, as it was coming into Hawaii, completely filled with smoke. Because the landing gear wouldn't go down. I didn't know what was worse, the smoke or the landing gear not going down. And then the plane flying, a different plane flying from Hawaii to Wake Island with the military air transport service, lost power in some motors. I mean, the final flight to Japan didn't have any trouble, but I was lucky to be alive even to just get to Japan.
Like on this ward, you were trying to do the right thing, trying to help the patients. And as I recall from the book, there was one of the patients, William Goldsmith, and your initial impression was that he was perfectly sane. It seems like later on you were proved wrong.
Yeah.
You can tell us about that.
I made that story the first story because it underscores my own naivete. I really liked this kid, Billy Goldsmith. because he seemed very bright. He was interested in literature. He wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer. And as far as I could see, there was absolutely nothing the matter with him. He seemed saner than anybody on the ward, including the psychiatrist, psychologist, nurse, and we medics. And finally, I went to see the captain, and I said, "Captain, I think we made a mistake. This kid's completely sane." And he said, "Are you a psychiatrist?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, then don't diagnose the patients, okay? This is close to insubordination." But then I began to notice some things about Billy Goldsmith. Whenever the food cart came on the ward, he didn't go to it. I said, "Hey, Billy, aren't you hungry?" No, I'm full. So I figured, I don't know, maybe he bought a whole lot of candy bars the night before when the sort of candy and newspaper and magazine cart came on the ward. But then the next night, I was on PM duty. He also didn't get up when it came on the ward. And finally I said, "Billy, are you still not hungry?" He said, "No, I'm full. I'm absolutely full." I said, "Well, what have you been eating?" He said, "About 60. I said, "About 60 what?" He said, 60 cups of coffee. I said, "You've had 60 cups of 60?" Because we had a big coffee machine that one of us was responsible to keep going. "You've had," "Yeah, I average about 60 cups a day." And I thought, well, with sugar and milk, right? I mean, I was thinking get some nourishment from that. He said, "Oh, no, real coffee drinkers like it black." And again, he's explaining this in a perfectly rational way. I didn't drink coffee then. I thought, well, I don't know, maybe this is not unusual. I still didn't get it. And then I said, "Will do you eat anything else?" He said, "Oh, yes, I eat a lot of it." I said, "What's it?" He said, "Cigarettes." I said, "You mean you eat the cigarettes?" No, he said, "I smoke the cigarettes." "How many do you smoke?" "About 4 packs a day." "Well, what else do you eat?" And he said, "Nothing. I'm just absolutely full." And then I began to realize he wasn't just thin. He wasn't just slim. He wasn't just thin. He was emaciated. And so I said, "Hey, Billy, would you do me a favor? Would you, when I come on duty tomorrow, would you tell me what you had for lunch and have something for dinner?" It would really, we're friends, and because I had really befriended him. Because I didn't treat him like the other patients. And it would really make me feel good. He said, "Mike, you're my best friend." I thought, wait a minute, I don't know if I'm his best friend, but we were very friendly. He said, "For you, I'll do it. I'll eat something else." And I came on the ward the next day for the PM shift, and he was all smiles, and he said, "I really had something important for lunch today." I said, "Billy, I'm so glad to hear that. What'd you have?" He said, "Razor blades." "Yeah, what do you mean razor blades?" "Oh, yeah, razor blades." How could just, and these were, not the throwaway razors of today. These were Gillettes. Regular size that you could take out. Although we shaved the patients, they in a shaver that was locked from the bottom. There was no way you could get a razor out of it if you didn't have that tool. How he got these razor blades, I never knew. So I said, "Well, what do you mean you ate a razor blade? How could you swallow a razor blade?" "Yeah, I broke them in half." "So how many did you eat?" "Only 4, but I really feel good about it because I probably was anemic before. Now I've had some iron, I'm starting to realize that maybe Billy is really crazy after all." And sure enough, we took him to X-ray, and there were 8 halves of razor blades right in his stomach. As I looked at it on the wall, on the lighted wall, I thought, oh no. So he went to surgery. And that was quite an experience because it underscored to me my own naivete about who's insane and who is not. And sometimes what I learned during that year and a half of active duty in that ward was sometimes the really sane-seeming people are the people who are the most insane. That the rest of us who might be garden variety neurotics, we're not insane. But some of the insane people are so logical and so rational. so it's hard to pick them out from the super sane people.
Can you tell us a little bit about the visit of Cardinal Francis Spellman?
Right. Well, we had gay guys on the ward, and this is, you know, at this time, don't ask, don't tell would have been a paradise compared to what we did. Gays discovered to be gay in the Navy were not only, quote, sick, and that was before the American Psychiatric Association changed its manual to no longer define homosexuality as a sickness that needed treatment, okay? So they were, the Navy was being charitable, it called them sick, but they were also, quote, criminals. And they were given electroshock treatments to change their sexual orientation, certainly against their will. And when they left us, they were generally court-martialed, sent to Leavenworth Prison 2 or 3 years, and then were given their honorable discharge. And the fact that I, 2021, never thought there was anything strange about this is something that I'll be ashamed of for the rest of my days. I mean, because, frankly, I understood the murderers better than the gay guys. I didn't. I arrived. Kids today get a much better education with regard to sexual variety, and they're all different kinds of people, and they're all good. They're just different. Everybody's okay. I'd never heard of gay people before. I was still figuring out girls myself, and I thought all men were figuring out girls or had already figured them out. The fact I could sit and talk with a murderer, and he said, "Yeah, I got really furious. I blew my top, and I shot this other Marine." You know, I guess that could happen to anybody. I really didn't understand the gay guys. Well, anyway, it turned out that Francis Cardinal Spellman, the New York Cardinal, who was considered the most powerful cardinal in the world, in fact, there was a book written on him called The American Pope, was coming to our ward. I was going to go to the open ward and then the locked ward.
So he was going to inspect the place.
Yeah, he was going to, he was going to come and bless everybody on the ward.
So as I recall, the captain, he wanted to get rid of the gay guys for the Cardinal's visit.
Yes. What happened was we had all the patients prepared. We gave the murderers a Thorazine shot, which leaves you like a vegetable, so they couldn't possibly kill the Cardinal if they wanted to. We had the suicides, that is, unsuccessful ones, whose wrists were all bandaged, keep their arms behind their back. We got the catatonics up and tied them to their beds, or racks, as they were called in the Navy, et cetera, et cetera. And 5 minutes before the Cardinal arrives, there was a call to the ward from the head shrink, who was calling from the open ward upstairs, said, "Put Rockhead on the ward." That's what he always called me, Rockhead, instead of Rockland. And I came on the phone, and he said, "Rockhead, I want you to take the gay guys out in the backyard and play basketball with them." I said, "Sir, but I've never met a Cardinal. I'm really looking forward to it." "That's just too bad." It's funny, he said, "You're Jewish. You don't have to meet the Cardinal." I said, "Well, even if I don't have to, 2 of the guys I know to be Catholic. Certainly they should meet the Cardinal. That's important to them." He said, "I don't want the Cardinal to know that we have such disgraceful people in the United States Navy. I want you to take them out in the backyard and play basketball with them so that the Cardinal doesn't know about these people." So I was the one who, quote, protected, unquote, Cardinal Spellman from contamination by knowing these or seeing these gay guys on the ward. Well, ironically, and then 10 minutes later they called and said the Cardinal, they called us back in from the yard, said the Cardinal's gone, you can come back in. So lo and behold, years later, I read this article in Vanity Fair magazine about Cardinal Spellman, that he was an absolutely predatory, ferociously exploitative of young priests, of children, he would send his limo from the rectory, which is right around the corner, just off Fifth Avenue. St. Patrick's is on Fifth Avenue, and the rectory's around the corner. He would send his limo to pick up chorus boys on Broadway. And I'm the one who protected him.
Quite an irony.
Yeah, when these poor gay guys needed more protection from him than he needed from them. I mean, it's a funny story, but it's also a tragic story as to how ignorant we were at that time.
Well, Professor Rockland, I want to thank you for coming to East Brunswick Television and sharing your stories with us, and we look forward to reading the book.
Thank you. Hope you will.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.